Hi, I'm Jenny Stewart, and I'm an assistant professor of community medicine at University of Tulsa and the associate director for training and mentoring here at the Laureate Institute for Brain Research in Tulsa. So welcome to my 13-week K-Club class, explaining all the things you need to do in preparing and submitting a K application. So for our first week, we will go over K awards, what they are, what a funding opportunity announcement or FOA is, the National Institutes of Health process for a research grant, an overview of the grant submission process and NIH structure, what program officers or who program officers are, different K award sections, the scope of the K awards, the K mentorship team, and action items or homework. So ways you can get started thinking about your K. So K awards, what are they? They're training grants from NIH. So what skills do you have that you want to further develop? What new skills do you want to learn? And what are your career goals that this grant can help you accomplish? So K awards are great if you need more training in both career and research. How can this training help you transition to become a successful independent investigator? So K awards have a research section and a career development section. And there are varying applicant requirements. So typically these are, you want to apply for a K if you're a senior level postdoc or a faculty level candidate. You must have a full-time appointment at an institution and be able to devote full-time effort, so at least 9 months or 75% on research, with the rest on other career development opportunities. So what are the requirements for a mentor or a mentorship team? So at least one mentor should have a current active R01 level grant. So ours are the next level in NIH grant funding. In terms of money, K awards pay salary and health insurance benefits for you and research costs such as tuition and fees related to your career development or skills, supplies, equipment, technical personnel, travel for your career development, and statistical services. However, no money goes to the mentors on your mentorship team for your K. There's a big waiting period between grant submission and a potential award. So 8 or 9 months if you get your K awarded the first time, which is highly unlikely. So what ends up happening is that people get feedback on their first K submission and then have to revise and resubmit, which takes even more time. So you want to plan ahead. There are multiple types of K awards, and we'll go over 5 of them in the next few slides. So we'll go over the basics of each K award next, but my examples tend to focus on National Institute of Mental Health and NIH rules because that's where many of library researchers submit grant applications. After we go through the K award basics, most of my slides will be geared toward K99 R00 applications, although there's quite a bit of overlap across K applications, so it'll still be relevant if you're doing a K01, K08, etc. All right, K01, Mentored Research Scientist Career Development Award. What are the requirements for applicants? This is typically for postdoc and early career research scientists, so within 10 years of your Ph.D. You must be a U.S. citizen, foreign national, or U.S. resident to apply for this one. And this is focused on for people who propose to train in a new field, have had a hiatus in their research career, or can argue that this grant will enhance workforce diversity. So you must show that you are committed to a research career, you need advanced research training, and you need additional research experience to meet your career goals. You can do a clinical trial if you want to. We won't be focusing too much on clinical trials here. In a few lectures, I'll define what a clinical trial is, but that most of clinical trial design, etc., is outside the scope of this class. In terms of money, this grant gets you 3 to 5 years of funding, and there are different salary caps for different centers and institutes. For example, NIMH, the salary cap is $90K a year, and research support is $50K a year. All right, and we're going to move into 2 clinical related Ks, K08, so Mentored Clinical Scientist Research Career Development Award, So this is for clinical psychology PhDs or MDs who already have shown promise in research. Again, you must be a US citizen, foreign national, or US resident to apply, and you must show that you are clinically trained. You want to pursue a career that has significant impact on health-related research needs in the US, preferably as an academic faculty member in a health-based institution. So this could be Veterans Administration, medical school, hospital, etc. You can do a clinical trial if you want to, but you don't have to. Up to 5 years of funding for this one. There's different salary caps across centers and institutes. For NIMH, the salary cap is $100K a year, and research support is $50K a year. So the K-23 is like the K-08 in that it's great for clinical psychologists and MDs, but this is called a patient-oriented research career development award. So it's good for postdocs or early career people within 10 years of your degree. Again, you must be a US citizen, foreign national, or US resident to apply for this one. You must show that you're clinically trained and you want to pursue a career as a clinical investigator focusing on patient-oriented research, so you're directly interacting with subjects. And again, you can do a clinical trial if you want to, but you don't have to. Up to 5 years of funding, there are different salary caps. NIMH has a similar salary cap for the K-08 as the K-23. So again, K-08 and K-23, very focused on clinical research. In contrast, the K-25 is focused on quantitative research. So here, this grant mechanism is good for engineering or science PhDs whose research has not been primarily focused on health and disease, so statistics, economics, computer science, physics, chemistry, etc. However, you must be a US citizen, foreign national, or US resident to apply. So you can be a postdoc or any level of investigator for the K-25, and that's sort of how this mechanism is novel in that it's not limited to the first 10 years after your PhD. In terms of money, again, it's up to 5 years of funding. The salary cap is $100K per year, and research support is $40K a year. Okay, so here's the grant we're going to be focusing on for most of this series of classes. Pathway to Independence Award, K99R00. So this grant mechanism is limited to postdocs only, and you can't have more than 4 years of postdoc experience. So the grant involves initial mentored research experience, so that's the K99 phase up to 2 years, followed by an independent research position or phase, R00, so that's up to 3 years to secure, say, an assistant professor position. And during the R00 period, you're supposed to apply for R01 level funding, so the next level up in terms of NIH grants. You can do clinical trials, but you don't have to. And typically you start off at one institution and move to an assistant professor faculty position elsewhere. So people don't tend to stay in the same place, although I'm sure there's circumstances where you can. In terms of money, up to 5 years of funding again, there are different salary caps for K99 across the institutes and centers, but the NIMH salary cap for K99 is $75K a year. Whereas the research support is $20K a year. So you don't have a ton of money to pay subjects or to, for example, book the fMRI scanner, which can be pretty expensive. R00 costs, in contrast, cannot be more than $249K a year. So that includes your salary and research costs. In the R00 phase, you have a lot more money for research. So what do you need to consider before writing a K grant application? Do you have at least one mentor who has a successful track record of A, getting NIH or other grants funded, and B, training students to become independent scientists? If yes, awesome. You're well on your way to deciding to write a K. If no, no worries, you may be able to put together a mentorship team who has these skills, and we will get to this later. In either case, talk to your primary mentor about whether a K application is a good way to go. Next, how much time can you commit to this? So you can submit K applications 3 times a year, so you're not limited to, planning for only one deadline a year. you want to go to the grants.nih.gov website and look for the due dates and submission policies for the K awards. I recommend that you start writing a K grant 6 months before a particular due date, and I'm not joking because there are a lot of pieces you need to pull together. And we will go over these pieces in a few slides. So how do you find out about these K awards? So you can look for funding opportunity announcements, or FOAs, fitting your research and career on the NIH website. There are different K awards with varying eligibility criteria, as we already went over, and timelines. So you can go to the NIH.gov website, look under programs and career development for more info. For this course, we'll focus on the K99R00 grant mechanism, but most components of the K99R00 are like other K applications, so it will still be relevant to writing your own K, whether or not it's a K01, K08, K23, or K25. So, researchtraining.nih.gov, you can see there are funding opportunity announcements, or FOAs, remember that acronym, on the right-hand side in the red box. So what you're going to do is comb through those funding opportunity announcements and find one relevant to your research, at least one. Before we get into the nitty-gritty, let's do an overview of the grant submission process. Look at the big picture before we get into the tiny details. So before we dive too deep into FOAs, let's take a step back and go over what happens to a K application in the NIH after you submit it. Then we will review overall NIH structure to explain the role of program officers in your K grant application. All right, so the NIH process for a research grant. There you are. You're initiating a research idea on the left-hand side. You're submitting your application to NIH from your school or other research center. It goes to NIH Center for Scientific Review, where your application is assigned to a study section. The study section evaluates your grant for scientific merit and decides to give your grant a score, which typically alludes to the fact that your application is related to that particular center's goals, meets other criteria, or if not scored, then might mean that the research plan is not really of interest. But then the study section sends their outcomes, the scores, the feedback on your grant to Institute, which evaluates your project for program relevance and looks at your score. Then your application is sent to the National Advisory Council, recommending action, sends this information to the Institute director. So say your grant gets scored, the lower the score, the better. You'll get score information and a percentile and a list of comments and questions and ratings from the study section. If your score is low enough to receive funding, then you will get funds allocated and you will get the K award and you will conduct the research in your project. Let's do an overview of NIH structure so you can get an idea of how different research topics are organized within NIH. So there are 27 institutes and centers within NIH, and there's a list at this website, and specific K grants are sponsored by one or more of these institutes or centers. So you might look at an FOA, you want to make sure that the center or institute that you're interested in getting funding from is actually sponsoring that FOA. So you need to find a K funding and opportunity announcement, FOA, and a program officer from an institute or center that fits your research area. So let's talk about how you find who a program officer relevant to your research is. We'll also talk about in the next few slides what a program officer does. But let's use the example from the National Institute of Mental Health. So at the top of the hierarchy, we have the Institute Director, Josh Gordon. Then we have division directors under Josh Gordon. So in this case, in NIMH, we have 5 different divisions. They each have a director. Now we're going to go within the division of translational research and see what is underneath there in terms of branches. So under DTR, there are 5 branches of more specific research and 5 branch chiefs. So within these branches, we're going to go look within adult psychopathology and psychosocial interventions research and look to see the programs within that branch. So here in pink, I've listed the 7 programs within adult psychopathology and their chiefs, or who are in charge of each of those programs. And within each program, there is typically a program officer listed. As you can see from some of these anxiety disorders, there's a program officer listed. Computational psychiatry, however, there is not. So sometimes you need to do a little bit more sleuthing to figure out who the program officer is if, say, computational psychiatry is your area of interest. So there's a similar structure for National Institute on Drug Abuse. You have Nora Volkov as the institute director, then you have division directors, then branch chiefs. For instance, here, this is branches within the neuroscience and behavior division. And then within behavioral cognitive neuroscience branch, this box on the bottom lists the program officers for various types of research within that branch. So what do program officers do? So they advise grant applicants on what the institute is interested in funding. They attend scientific review meetings, so where the grant applications are actually reviewed. They make funding recommendations, they monitor awarded grants, and they foster specific science through initiatives, meetings, and conferences. So a lot of these program officers go to conferences that you may also be attending. They talk to the public, and they maintain their own scientific expertise. So on the right here, we have a paragraph from Holly Moore, who's a program officer at NIDA, explaining her research interests and background and what area of research she's involved in within NIDA. So why do I need to contact a program officer early on during my grant writing process? This person knows what a particular NIH center or institute is currently funding. So if they think that their branch division of the center and institute won't be interested in your research project, they may direct you to another division, another branch, give you feedback on how to revise your project to make it more fundable. And if you ask, they can give advice on whether the FOA you are using is what they would recommend, or if there is another one that better suits your application. So you don't want to spend all this time on a grant for nothing. You want to check first with the program officer before you spend months writing something that a particular center or institute may not be interested in. So how do you figure out who your program officer is? So there's a tool to help find a program officer under Project Reporter, nih.gov. You can search there your area of research, and it will match you with some program officers they think might be relevant. Alternatively, if you'd like an adventure, you can go down a fun rabbit hole of government websites. If you want to do the rabbit hole, after you figure out which NIH institute or center you're applying to and what funding announcement you're using, you can go on that institute or center's website. Then you read about each division until you find one that can fit your research. Within that division, you read about each branch until you find one fitting your research. Then with those branches, look at the programs fitting your research. I recommend that you write down the names of these program officers, their phone numbers, and their email addresses, along with what program, branch, and division they are in, so that you can easily reference them and send this information to your primary mentors and other people on your mentorship team. Talk with your mentors, particularly your primary mentor, about your potential options on who to contact first if there is more than one program officer overseeing research related to your research. Do I really need 6 months to pull a K application together? I would say yes. Let's talk the number of K application sections that you have to write. So on the left, we have research, middle, career, right, we have setting. We will be going through all of these in detail during this class, but needless to say, there are a lot of sections for you to write, and even ones that say that they involve your mentor or co-mentors, often you're writing the first draft of those for those people. So your K application could easily be over 50 pages long. You will also write an email to at least one program officer, and if your research project meets criteria for a clinical trial, there will be additional sections you will need to write beyond the scope of this course. Wow, that's a lot of writing. Where do I start? Well, first, you need to meet with your primary mentor to brainstorm the scope and content of your K research project. Discuss new skills that you want to learn and what your short and long-term career goals are. Visualize an ideal potential mentorship team for your K that can help you achieve these research and career goals. They don't have to be at your particular research institute or university. They can be outside and still be on your team. So next week we will cover how to write specific aims, which is arguably the most important section of your grant, and your NIH BioSketch. After your primary mentor gives you feedback on both documents, you can email a program officer attaching your specific aims in NIH BioSketch, asking for feedback. Then you can email potential mentorship team members, also attaching these documents, asking if they would be willing to join your K team. Okay, let's talk scope of your K project. For the K99, so the first 2 years of your grant, the training part, it makes sense, if you can, to do secondary data analysis of an already collected research project or developing a new protocol or a pilot study. Why? Because you only have 2 years to get it done, and your research budget is only $20K a year, so that's very limiting in terms of subject payment, other research costs. For the R00, years 3 to 5 of the grant, where you're transitioning to independence, new data collection building on your K99 themes, but not dependent on whether or not your K99 hypotheses work out, makes more sense. Why? Because you have up to 3 years and your research budget is close to $250K a year, so that's plenty more money for subject payment and research costs. Okay, let's get back to K mentorship team. So your mentor should not be a total repeat of grad school advisors, just a heads up. Your primary mentor should have a current or recent R01 or equivalent grant. They could have an RSAD, they could have an NSF grant, they could have some other grant. If your primary mentor doesn't, it isn't the end of the world if the other people on your mentorship team do. If you plan to have co-mentors, they should have research and training strengths that your primary mentor does not have, so they complement each other. They should be able to help you develop research ideas that are independent from your primary mentor, and it would also be good for them to have NIH R-level grants. So you can have consultants on your mentorship team, and this person provides advice or services. So they could be supplying software, providing technical assistance or training, or setting up equipment. They could also be a statistician or another researcher whose task you're using. So again, you're paying this person out of your research budget. So work with your primary mentor first to brainstorm research and training goals for K99 R00. For the K99 phase of your grant, devise at least one research goal involving hypothesis testing, at least one career goal. So for example, gaining advanced training in a particular skill or area or securing an assistant professor position. For the R00 phase of your grant, devise at least one research goal, again involving hypothesis testing, and at least one career goal. So setting up your own lab and training staff as you transition to an independent investigator, for example. Okay, there are 2 accounts you'll need to set up and link together at the outset of this grant application process. The first is an Electronic Research Administration, or ERA Commons account. ERA Commons is an online interface where NIH officials, principal investigators, trainees, and postdocs can access and share administrative info related to grants. So talk to your primary mentor about who you should contact at your institution to set this up. There is a website, era.nih.gov, that has frequently asked questions that I recommend you check out. Okay, the second account is the Open Researcher and Contributor ID, or ORC ID. This is used within NIH to relate your publications to your grants. After you get an ERA Commons account, you could create your ORC ID account and link them together yourself. And there are multiple websites that show you how to do that. All key personnel listed in your grant, and we'll discuss these people in week 2, need to have these accounts as well. So primary mentor, co-mentors, for example, and consultants, among other people. Okay, let's go over other important things to note. So your grant application is based on your project and your history of productivity and success. So you want to have 2 to 3 papers published on the topic you're covering unless you're going into a new field or innovation area. Grant applications are a total time killer, so some of you already know this, so get ready to set aside many hours for this writing process. Regardless of whether you're a last-minute person or an early planner, make sure you familiarize yourself with all of the required grant sections way ahead of time, at least 2 months before the grant is due, because you don't want any surprises. You will need letters of support from your institute and university, your mentor, co-mentors, any collaborators, and reference letter writers, and often you end up writing the drafts of these letters yourself, and that the people then slightly edit. So take note that you will be writing the majority of the sections and letters needed for this grant. If your university or place of research has a grants office, please contact them to determine when they will need all of your grant documents. So although NIH may have a particular grant deadline, let's say it's October 5th, your grants office may want all of those documents 2 weeks before the grant is actually due. So you want to make sure that you know that ahead of time. Okay, what are some action items you can take? Let's talk about homework. So talk to your primary mentor about whether a K application is right for you. Review the various K funding mechanisms and see which one is the best fit given your research and career goals. Work on setting up ERA Commons and ORCID accounts, ASAP. Figure out which NIH center or institute fits your research best and search for an FOA sponsored by that center or institute that you will use when applying for your K. This is important to carve out time with your primary mentor to brainstorm the scope and content of your K research projects, discuss potential K co-mentors to aid in your research and career goals, and develop a timeline for K submission, picking the K deadline about 6 months away from your starting point. And that is the end of week 1. Thank you for joining me.